Today we're going to talk about warm-up fundamentals for middle school and high school students. What is a warm-up? Well, a warm-up is a 5 to 10 minute readiness period at the beginning of a rehearsal. And when I say readiness, I mean physical, mental, and then teaching vocal concepts. So those are the purposes of the warm-up. There's to get them physically ready, mentally ready, and then also to teach specific vocal concepts. So when I say physical readiness, students come to school many times. If it's an early morning rehearsal, they're not physically ready to sing. Their voices aren't warmed up at all. They maybe haven't had breakfast. They haven't drank any water. Those are all damaging on the voice if you just immediately start singing hard for an hour. So that warming up of the voice gradually is a very helpful technique. That also helps focus them on the task at hand. You have little short tasks that they have to immediately move into and move to the next topic, and that actually helps them focus their mental acuity at the same time. Now let's talk about those vocal concepts that you can teach in a warm-up. You can teach everything from breathing, breath control, posture. Those are all fundamental tasks that have to happen in order to produce a good sound at the beginning of any singing experience. And so working on those basic, this is how you stand, feet slightly apart, one foot in front of the other, knees not locked, torso up out of the hip sockets, all of those posture rules will come with time. They will not happen overnight, but if you regularly incorporate those basic vocal concepts into your warm-up period, especially at the very beginning of the year, that will help set the stage for it becoming a natural routine. Then you can go into other things like vowel production and vowel placement and actually just basic tone production itself. You can also deal with things like agility. How fast can they sing this little pattern? You know, the ability to make big jumps and all those kinds of issues that don't come without some attention to that particular skill. You can work on range. How high can they sing? How low can they sing? And helping the students expand what their natural given voice is. You can work on tone color and phrasing. You can also work on things like ear training, and that's that sight reading ability where they see a note on the page and hear it in their ear before they have to sing it, and being able to associate that pitch is high, that pitch is low, that pitch is in between, and having a concept of where that is in their voice. And the use of solfege is really critical in teaching that ear training concept, because that helps them assign certain sounds to certain intervals, and it's very, very helpful. Oral training is also something that can be addressed in the warm-up time period. Now, when we say oral training, that deals more with intonation and the ability to blend with others, and those two things aren't necessarily the same. Yes, intonation is, are we in the key together, but somebody can be out of tune with themselves, and then and they're out of tune with everybody. But then some people can be in tune with themselves, but they're still out of tune with everybody because they still don't understand that concept of blending with their neighbors. And so those kinds of tasks we can address in the warm-up period. Now let's talk about procedures for warm-ups. What actually happens during the warm-up time? As I stated before, there are some concepts that you can't really just apply in a song because they have to happen before you actually sing. Things like breathing and posture and good ability to move the jaw freely and all of those kinds of things. You really have to address those ahead of time. But if you can, it's best to try to relate your warm-up to something that actually physically happens in a piece that you're working on at that moment. And that really makes the transfer of knowledge much quicker and easier on your part as the teacher. And so you might do something like, say you have a piece that requires them to sing staccato for the first time, and they don't really understand how to energize the diaphragm to make that staccato note, and so they don't have the energy to do it. So maybe you'll take the 5-note example that you've been singing. They're singing a legato 5-note scale. Maybe now we sing it on and they have to separate each one of those notes. So they learn how to use a staccato note in that context. Then when they get to the song, they'll be able to much more successfully do a staccato note. Maybe it's something like a run in a Handel piece from something from the Messiah or Judas Maccabeus or whatever. And they are having difficulty with those intervals and the repetition of the pattern that moves down the scale. So maybe you create something like this. Something that allows them to practice that pattern over and over sequentially, so that then when they get to it in the piece of music, it'll be much easier for them to grasp that concept. Now, that might not happen with the first rehearsal and the first introduction of that warm-up exercise, but if you do it again, then the next time you get to it, it'll be easier, and it will help you increase their facility in that regard. Now then, let's talk about incorporating movement in our warm-ups. I'm a big proponent of that. I think that the use of movement focuses their attention, it focuses their body energy into the task that they're trying to do, and so it's really hard for them to be looking and doing something else when they have to do something like this with everybody. And if they don't do this with everybody, then they're going to be the odd one out. So I use this little exercise doing something like, and the tone needs to bounce back and forth, and then you take it up by half steps, and that helps them to energize the tone immediately. If they've come into rehearsal and they're just dragging, it's a dreary day, it's raining, nobody wants to be there day, then once you start energizing the body, then all of a sudden the tone becomes energized and they get up on the pitch, and then things are much better. It helps improve the rehearsal. You can also do things that help them support the high pitches, things that require, like if they have to sing, I love to sing. Whenever they go to the high note, they may not have enough breath support, or they may be approaching it like this. And so I'll incorporate the use of a plie so that they have to balance their body as they go down. I love to sing. So something like that. So using movement is really critical, and I think it is a big energizer for a rehearsal. Then let's talk about some actual procedures for when you do these vocalizing exercises. Where do you start? How far do you go? Which direction? A lot of exercises work their way up the scale. We're usually more interested in expanding the range on the upper end. So usually starting around middle C is a good place to start. And then work up my half steps, and then tenors and sopranos will go much higher than altos and basses. So I instruct my altos and basses to drop out whenever it's appropriate for their voice. Whenever they feel uncomfortable and it's no longer a good sound, drop out, and then everybody else goes on up. And so you'll have students who go all the way to the top who may be basses, but they're using their falsetto, but they don't care. And that's good use of that. And then if you want to work down the scale, I would start around the F major hand position, or maybe the E major hand position. Same thing, work down by half steps. Okay, and that gets you down as far as you want to go. The rule of thumb is when you get to the top end and you have 2 or 3 sopranos or tenors still singing, that's when you should stop. You don't want to leave somebody stranded up there by themselves. Same thing going down. Work down until you hear there's only 2 or 3, 4 people still singing, and then that's a good place to stop their exercise, and then move on to something else. So working those registers like that is important, and knowing where to start the patterns is also an important concept. Be sure to give time to practicing your warm-ups. Make sure you know how to play them if you have to play them for yourself. If you can play standing up, that's great, but if you can't, go ahead and sit down at the keyboard because you want to be able to play it accurately. Know that you don't have to play both hands together. You can just play the chord with the left hand just so that the men can hear their low pitches down there to tune. I would also say if you're planning to have your accompanist play for you, make sure that you write these out. Use Finale or whatever, or even if you just have to handwrite it on some manuscript paper and give them a copy of what those look like. They will be very appreciative, and they'll have a chance to prepare ahead of time, and that'll make your rehearsal go much more seamlessly. Okay? So I look forward to seeing how you incorporate these ideas of warm-ups into your lesson plans that you hand in. I will be very eager to see those.